Your home is your sanctuary, a place where you should feel safe, protected from the dangers of the outside world. But what happens when that safety is violated? Tonight, I'm diving into 4 stories of unwelcome visitors, intruders who weren't just passing through. These stories will leave you locking your doors and double-checking your windows. If you think it can't happen to you, think again. The first snowstorm of the season had hit the night before, leaving everything covered in a pristine, sparkling blanket of white. My son Luke couldn't wait to get outside the next morning, so I bundled him up in his snow gear and we headed into the backyard to play. He laughed as he made snow angels and tossed clumps of snow at me. It was really a perfect moment, until I noticed something odd. Just at the edge of our yard, inside the fence, there were footprints. They were faint but unmistakable, originating from the gate at the far corner of the yard, where the woods bordered our property, straight to the back of our house. The gate was there when we moved in. The landlord had mentioned it was to have easy access to the path in the woods behind the house. But now this didn't seem so much like a feature. "Look, Mommy, someone was here," Luke said, pointing. I forced a smile and nodded, trying to hide my fear. There shouldn't have been anyone in our little yard, but the prints were fresh, made sometime during the night, now just faint indents covered by more snow. They must have been made early in the night. I wouldn't have even noticed them if we hadn't been near that side of the fence. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a neighbor kid cutting through the woods, but the thought that someone had been there during the night made me uncomfortable enough that I couldn't stay out there for very long, and I ushered Luke back inside. I pushed a little stick through the gate latch to stop anyone from easily opening the door. That night, I locked the house doors and made sure all the windows were latched before heading to bed. Because of the fence, I didn't always lock the back door during the day. That would have to stop. The following morning, I opened the curtains and froze. There they were again. Footprints, walking the same path from the woods to our house, but this time they led all the way up to the living room window. Following them back to the gate, I saw the stick had been pulled from the latch, meaning someone intentionally wandered through that gate. If it had been a kid, they wouldn't have been able to reach the latch. My stomach churned. I called the police, who came out to take a look. "Yeah, it could be a kid messing around," the officer said, ignoring my argument that it would be too hard for a kid to reach that latch. He told me to keep the doors and windows locked and to call if I noticed anything else. The next night, the footprints returned, now circling the house. Whoever it was had stopped at nearly every window. That's when I decided it was time to bring in backup. My sister breeds German shepherds as protection dogs, and I asked her if one of her dogs could help her auntie feel safer. She loaned me Onyxia, a large black shepherd that adored Luke. She was one of my sister's favorite dogs, and I trusted my sister's training in her. I knew she'd make me feel safer. By evening, Onyxia was at our house, following me from room to room, alert and confident. That night, I set up a bed for her in my room. I fell asleep to the comforting sound of her steady breathing, her mere presence giving me a sense of security I hadn't felt in days. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of her growling, a low, guttural warning. It scared me, honestly, because I was disoriented, and for a moment I forgot I had a dog in my house at all. Before I could even react, she bolted out of the room, her nails scratching against the hardwood floors as she ran downstairs. A second later, I heard her barking like crazy at the back door. I threw on my robe and ran down after her. The back door was wide open, the freezing wind whipping through the house. I could see Onyxia outside, barking at the fence gate, her nose pointed at fresh footprints in the snow. "Onyxia, come!" I shouted, and after a moment she came running back. But just as I grabbed her collar, her ears perked up again, and she suddenly turned and broke free, lunging toward the front of the house. I barely had time to follow her as she sprinted to the front door, arriving just as it slammed shut. My heart dropped. Someone had been inside. I looked out the front window just in time to see a small white car pulling away, its taillights disappearing into the night, but there was no license plate. Running upstairs to Luke, I felt the cold wet of melting snow on the landing, but not beyond. They must have heard Onyxia and run down and out the front door. Luke was still sleeping quietly. The police came, checked the house, and took my statement. There wasn't really much they could do. They told me to stay vigilant and again to be sure I kept my doors locked. A few days later, I saw a news report on TV. A little boy had been abducted just 4 miles away. Witnesses reported seeing a small white car in the neighborhood that night. The thought of how close I had come, how close Luke had come to something awful, terrified me. What would have happened if Onyxia hadn't been there to scare whoever it was away, or if my sister hadn't trained her properly? Since then, I've added cameras around the house and a proper gate lock to the fence. My sister gave me one of Onyxia's puppies, and we're beginning her protection training. But even now, every time it snows, I can't help but scan the yard for footprints. It had been a long day at work, and as I pulled into the driveway of my duplex, the weight of exhaustion hit me. My dog Daisy greeted me with her usual excitement, tail wagging furiously as I opened her crate. Okay, I laughed. Let's just get you outside. She bolted straight to the back of the yard, her nose glued to the ground. She sniffed furiously under the window at the rear of the house, occasionally letting out low, curious whines. "What's so interesting over there, girl?" I muttered, walking up to her. Nothing seemed out of place, so I chalked it up to some scent left by a raccoon or a stray cat. Back inside, I opened the fridge to grab my leftover mushu pork. It was my favorite takeout from the local Chinese place, and I'd been looking forward to it all day. Pulling at the container's folded edges, I stopped in confusion. The food looked fine, but it was mixed with white rice. I never mixed foods. It was just one of those things I didn't do. Staring at it, I tried to piece together how it could have happened. Had I done it absent-mindedly the night before? No, I was sure I hadn't. I didn't even like white rice. But I was hungry, so I dumped it in a bowl to nuke it when I noticed what was left seemed far less than what I'd left the night before. I told myself I was losing it, that I needed more sleep, and made a point of getting to bed earlier that night. I collapsed on the couch to eat and watched a movie before bed. Everything was fine until I climbed into bed when something felt off. The blankets smelled strange, faintly like sweat or body odor. I made a mental note to wash everything the next day, blaming it on working too much and missing my regular laundry day. But the unfamiliar odd smell lingered in my mind and kept me awake longer than usual. The next several days were full of things I couldn't explain, like things weren't quite where I remembered leaving them. I kept a glass of water by my bed, and it was empty when I got home, even though I know I hadn't drank any water the night before. Also, Daisy seemed on edge, barking randomly and sniffing around the house. These were things she did when she was overtired and didn't get enough sleep. Worst of all, I felt like I was losing my mind whenever I opened the pantry. A new bag of chips was opened, and things just looked out of place in general. These were all little things I couldn't prove, things I couldn't explain away, but I was finding it harder to ignore them. My duplex was generally quiet at night, since my neighbor Jen worked third shift, but one evening after I heard her leave, I heard a door slam from her side. I figured she'd just come home early since it was around the holidays, but even for this crazy time of year, things were getting weird. I'd made a New Year's resolution to work out more, and I woke up early on the 1st to go for a run. As I pulled on my hoodie, Daisy perked up, her ears twitching toward the back of the house. That's when I heard another slam from next door. I knew Jen wasn't home yet, since her car was still gone. Looking through the back window, I saw a dirty-looking guy in a torn jacket climbing out of Jen's window. He looked kind of frantic, his eyes darting around like he was trying to avoid being seen. When I saw him drop to the ground, I realized he had come out the window, not her back door. He turned from the duplex towards the woods, calmly walking away. It all made sense now. I suddenly realized I wasn't going crazy. This guy had been in my side of the house, too. Everything fell into place in a nauseating rush. My neighbor had a spare key to my place for when she helped walk Daisy. This guy must have been watching us, learned our patterns, and with my key had been slipping between the duplex sides, eating my food, sleeping in my bed. The thought of him blending into my daily life unseen, using my things and eating my food, using my dishes and silverware, sent a wave of disgust and terror through me. I'd been eating his leftovers. Daisy's behavior, the food, the strange smell in my sheets, it all made horrifying sense. Without thinking, I bolted outside. The man was already disappearing into the trees, his figure barely visible in the early morning light. I shouted after him, and he turned back and then bolted. I came to my senses enough to realize I shouldn't follow this creepy guy into the woods, and stopped. The police came, took my statement, and searched the woods, but they never found him. When my neighbor came home, she confirmed that her spare key to my place was missing, along with some of her jewelry and her camera. We changed our locks and spent New Year's Day deep cleaning everything, but the damage was already done. For days I felt anxious in my place, especially when I came home from work. I checked the pantry more frequently than a normal person would, looking for anything out of place. But things went back to normal. Daisy's behavior eventually settled down, too. But even now, I wake up sometimes with the thought, what if he comes back? When my parents went away for their week-long vacation last year, they left me in charge of their quiet suburban house. They wanted me to stop by the house every other day after work to check on things, feed the cat, and water the plants. They'd left me a spare key, and everything seemed routine. But the first evening, as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the upstairs bedroom light was on. I didn't think much of it. My dad was notorious for leaving lights on. I made a mental note to go up and turn it off before leaving. As I stepped out of my car and grabbed my bag, I turned back to the house. The light was off. I froze. My stomach sank, and the hairs on my neck stood up. For a second, I wondered if I'd imagined the light being on. Maybe they'd left the lights on a timer, and I just happened to get there when it switched off? I remember thinking, wait, that didn't make sense. It should be turning on at dark, not off. I stood there staring at the house. All the windows now stared back at me like dark, hollow eyes. It felt wrong, strange in a way I couldn't explain. I reached for my phone to call my dad, but stopped. What would I even say? I'm calling because of a lamp? I'd catch hell for bothering them. I walked up the porch steps, fumbling for the key. The familiar creak of the wooden boards underfoot felt unnervingly loud in the silence. It was cold and dark. Even the familiar sounds of kids playing outside were gone. The street was full of older people like my parents whose kids were grown and gone. Unlocking the door, I hesitated before stepping inside. The air was still and thick, like the house was holding its breath. I flipped on the hallway light and called out, "Hello?" No answer. I checked the living room first, and then the kitchen. Everything seemed normal. The dishes were neatly stacked by the sink, and my mom's note for feeding the cat Isabel sat on the counter. I moved cautiously up the stairs, looking for Isabel, who usually greeted me loudly. I heard the creak of my footsteps muffled by the carpet, but otherwise the house was silent. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I could see the faint outline of the lamp on the nightstand. It wasn't on. Pushing the door open, I scanned the room. The bed was made, the dresser undisturbed. Everything was in its place. I exhaled, laughing quietly at my own paranoia, until I noticed it. The closet door was cracked open, just an inch or two, enough to reveal a dark sliver of the space inside. My chest tightened. My parents always kept their closets closed. It was my mom's rule because of the cat. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my hand gripping the edge of the doorframe for support. Finally, I said something. "If someone's in there, I'm calling the cops." But my voice was shaky and unconvincing even to me. Still, nothing, no sounds. Summoning my courage, I stepped forward and flung the door open, ready to lunge. The closet was empty. The rows of hanging clothes swayed slightly as if disturbed. I leaned back against the wall, my legs weak with relief. But then, a sound. Behind me. I spun around just in time to see a figure dart out of the room, tall, fast, and dressed in black. My heart stopped as the realization hit me. Someone had been in the house the entire time, probably standing behind this bedroom door. Adrenaline surged and I bolted after them. "Hey!" I yelled, chasing them down the stairs. The intruder turned the corner into the kitchen and I heard the back door slam open. I tried following, skidding to a halt at the doorway. The backyard was empty, the gate swinging on its hinges. They were gone. Shaking, I locked the door and grabbed my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they would send an officer. While I waited, I checked the house again. In the kitchen, I noticed something chilling. A knife was missing from the magnetic strip on the wall. When the police arrived, they searched the house area, but found no sign of the intruder. They did, however, find evidence of forced entry on the basement window. My parents cut their vacation short, and we installed security cameras and new locks. To this day, I can't stop thinking about how long they were in that house before I got there, and what might have happened if I hadn't scared them off. It was a quiet evening, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural, as if the world is holding its breath. I had just moved into the house a week ago, a small 2-story home on the edge of town. It was old but charming, with creaky floorboards and vintage hardware that added to its character. But tonight it felt less like charm and more like isolation. Rain tapped against the windows, and the occasional gust of wind made the trees outside sway and lean. I was curled up on the couch, reading a book and sipping tea, when I heard it. The faintest sound of glass shifting. It was subtle, almost easy to dismiss as the wind, but something about it sent a chill down my spine. I put my book down and stood, listening. The house was silent in its usual way, but then I heard it again. This time a faint crunch of broken glass. My heart started to race. The kitchen window. I'd left it cracked open earlier, thinking the rain wouldn't blow in. I figured the wind was blowing harder than I thought. I grabbed my phone and inched toward the kitchen, turning off the lights as I went, hoping the darkness would give me an advantage. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'd seen it in a movie. As I got closer, I could feel the damp chill of the open window. I peered around the corner and saw it. The glass I'd left on the counter in front of the window was shattered, shards of glass glittering on the floor, and the curtains billowed with the breeze. I was relieved for a second, but then called out anyway. "Hello?" Only silence answered. I scanned the kitchen for anything out of place. Nothing. I closed and locked the window, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned to leave and froze. On the floor at my feet was a wet footprint, too large to be mine. My breath caught and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. I hadn't heard anyone leave or move around on my creaky hardwood floor. But then from upstairs I heard it. A single creak, followed by another, slow and careful. Someone was in my house. I bolted to the living room and grabbed the fireplace poker. The stairs loomed in front of me, the darkness at the top feeling impossibly thick. I didn't want to go up there, but I couldn't just stand there waiting for whoever was up there. I crept up the stairs, but every step creaked beneath me. At the top, I paused, holding my breath. The hallway was empty, the doors to the bedrooms slightly ajar. I stepped toward the first door, nudging it open with a poker. Empty. The second room was the same, and just as I was beginning to think I'd imagined the whole thing, I heard a soft thud from the master bedroom. My bedroom. I pushed the door open and tried to flick on the light, but the lamp didn't come on. My heart was pounding in my ears. The room was empty, but the window was open, rain blowing in and soaking the carpet. I stepped closer and saw it, a muddy footprint on the carpet in front of the window. And then I felt it. A breath, hot and close against the back of my neck. I spun around, swinging the poker wildly, but the room was empty. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting me off from any light, and I screamed, dropping the poker as I yanked at the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, low and guttural, right behind me, a whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Don't turn around." I didn't. I couldn't. The whisper hung in the air, cold and sharp. My hands trembled on the doorknob as I twisted and pulled with all my strength, but it still wouldn't open. I was trapped in the dark with something I couldn't see. It was toying with me. I could feel it behind me, close, oppressive, and patient. The room felt frigid. The muddy carpet beneath my feet turned icy, and my mind raced with options. Fight? Run? Scream? Every instinct told me not to turn around, to obey the command that had frozen me in place. But then it moved. Soft, slow footsteps circling me, a shape in the darkness. I clenched my fists, my fingernails digging into my palms as I tried to think. Then the footsteps stopped, and the silence pressed down like a weight. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned my head slightly, just enough to glimpse the corner of the room. Nothing was there. With the tension broken, I turned to the door, my fingers fumbling with the doorknob again, and this time it turned. The door creaked open, and I stumbled into the hallway. But I wasn't alone. At the end of the hall, just beyond the faint glow of the bathroom nightlight, stood a figure. It was tall and shadowed, its edges fuzzy like smoke dissipating into the air. Two glinting pinpricks of light, where eyes should have been, stared back at me. I froze, unable to move, as the figure raised an arm and pointed at me. My legs finally obeyed, and I bolted down the stairs, nearly falling down them in my panic. I sprinted for the front door. My only thought was to get out of that house. The door was locked. Frantically, I twisted the deadbolt and threw it open, the cold night air rushing in. I ran out into the rain, the wind rushing around me, and I made it to the middle of the driveway before I stopped to look back. The house was dark. No lights, no movement, just the faint glow of the bathroom nightlight through the upstairs window, my window, the one that had been opened. I didn't go back inside that night. I had nowhere to go, so I sat in my car, soaked and shivering, until sunrise, watching that cursed house. The next morning, I went back in for my essentials and left the house. I called the landlord from the safety of a gas station and told them I was moving out immediately. I didn't even explain why. Weeks later, I got a call from a new tenant, a cheerful woman who'd just moved in. She asked if I had ever experienced strange things in that house. Why? I asked, dread pulling in my stomach. The bedroom window, she said, her voice a little uneasy. It keeps opening by itself. And last night, I swear I heard footsteps in the hallway. I told her everything, and when I hung up, my hands were trembling. Whatever had been in that house was still there, waiting. 4 stories, 4 reminders that safety is never guaranteed. Whether it's a stranger slipping into your home unnoticed or footprints that shouldn't be there, these stories aren't just cautionary, they're a wake-up call. Tonight, as you turn out the lights and settle in, take a moment to look over your shoulder, because you never know who might already be there. If these stories gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who loves a good scare. Stay safe and stay alert.